You're listening to Dr. Ron Charles of the Cubit Foundation, an international humanitarian organization teaching the historical truths and good news of Jesus Christ all around the world. Today's message is entitled, Strike Arrows. And now, let's join Dr. Ron Charles.
We're going to be ministering out of 2 Kings 13, if you want to turn there. 2 Kings 13, we'll begin to read at verse number 14. Verse number 14, we're going to start reading. I'll be reading out of King James. Doesn't matter to me what you read out of. The reason why I use King James is because we have discovered that throughout the world it's more readily accepted than any other version. But so no sense trying to throw up barriers when none's needed. And so I read out of it. But whatever you feel like God wants you to read out of and study out of, that's up to you. When I study at home, I use about 40 different versions. So now Elisha was fallen sick of the sickness where he died. And Joash, the king of Israel, now at this time there were two Joashes. There's a Joash of Judah and a Joash of Israel. Now this was the Joash of Israel. They overlapped by about 3 years. And Joash, the king of Israel, came down unto him and wept over his face and said, O my father, the chariot of Israel, and the horsemen thereof. And Elisha said unto him, Take arrow and bows. And he took unto him bow and arrows. And he said to the king of Israel, Put thine hand upon the bow. And he put his hand upon it. And Elisha put his hands upon the king's hands. And he said, Open the window eastward. And he opened it. Then Elisha said, Shoot. And he shot. And he says, The arrow of the Lord's deliverance, and the arrow of deliverance from Syria. For thou shalt smite the Syrians in Aphek till thou have consumed them. And he says, Take the arrows. And he took them. And he said unto the king of Israel, Smite upon the ground. And he smote thrice and stayed. And the man of God was wroth with him. And he says, Thou shouldst have smitten 5 or 6 times. Then hadst thou smitten Syria, till thou hast consumed it. Whereas now thou shalt smite Syria but thrice. This happened in the year 798 BC. And Elisha was sick and he died. We don't know what this sickness was. Now, Elisha was about 89 years old at this time, 88 or 89 years old. He could have just died of old age. An 89-year-old person nowadays is old, but at that time they were ancient. We have a better health care nowadays, but at that time it would be equivalent to a person living today about 140 years old. So he was quite ancient for his day and time. And so, but we don't know why he died. We do know that he was sick and he did die. Elisha's house was located in the eastern part of the region of Samaria near the Jordan River. Now, the king of Israel, Joash, came and he would give his condolences for his sick prophet friend. Of course, Joash never took Elisha's advice. He was still as wicked as the devil, but still he felt like there was a closeness there to Elisha, so he came to give his condolences to Elisha, and he fell on his face and he cried and he wept. And Elisha, as the type of person that he was, very stern and to the point, he didn't even acknowledge the condolence. He just told Joash this. He says, Take a bow and an arrow and shoot the arrow out the east window. Now, this seems kind of strange, especially when you start talking about taking the arrows and hitting the ground and all of this. And for many years, this is one of these passages, and I don't know if you all ever do this or not. You probably don't. You're probably more spiritual than I am. But there are times that I read the Bible and these things that, well, I don't understand this. I'm just going to kind of skip over it and maybe get to something that I do understand. Well, this is one of those that I skipped over a number of times. Until the Lord kind of got a hold of me and says, now everything that's in my word is important. Every period, every comma, every paragraph, every capital letter, every thee, every thou, every me, and every and is just as important as the other. There's only one thing that's more important than anything else, and that's my sacrifice on Calvary. But once that is by itself, my sacrifice on Calvary is the ultimate. But after that, everything else is of equal importance. And so this passage is just as important as anything else that's in this Word. I says, yes, sir. So I began to study, and I discovered a few things. Now, the gist and the meat of this actually dates back about 1,200 years before this time, with a document that's called the Peace of Karnak. The Peace of Karnak was negotiated by Ramses the Great. Ramses the Great of Egypt. And it was a document that set the ethics for warfare. And these ethics for warfare set various principles that were accepted by various countries. Now, the Hittites are the only country as a whole that did not accept the Peace of Karnak as the ethics of war. And but every other country, the Egyptians, the Israel, Judah, the Edomites, the Syrians, the Babylonians, everybody of the ancient world agreed to the Peace of Karnak as with each generation that rolled on. And it wasn't, from the time of Ramses and his negotiation of this until the time of the Romans, every country and every empire and every group of people agreed to the principles of war and the ethics of war established in the Peace of Karnak. Israel is one of these signers. Now, David did not sign this agreement, but Solomon did. And so even Judah and Israel signed this agreement. So they were held together by these principles of war and the ethics of war. And what this ethics of war says this. Let's assume that you're a country over here on this side. Your borderline is here, and another country is over here. This country wants to invade this country for some reason. We don't know why. Just some reason they wanted to attack it. Well, along the border, the Peace of Karnak allowed fortifications or watchtowers to be built. These watchtowers, this country built theirs along the border, this country built theirs along the border. And what would happen is if this country wanted to invade this country, the king would send a representative to the border. And within eyesight and within view of these watchtowers, which were not only military watchtowers but political towers to determine the political status of the country also, the representative would take a bow and an arrow, and they would shoot an arrow over the border into the other country. And so once this was done, then the watchtower's representatives over here would go back to the king, and they would say, the declaration has been made. Now, over here on this side, this king, the representatives in the watchtower, they would send back word to their king and say, we have been invaded. We have been proclaimed war, an acknowledgement of war. Now, once that is done, then the representatives from both countries, or representatives who represented this king and this king, they would negotiate for 40 days. There would be no strife, there would be no fighting, there would be no bickering or backbiting, that type of thing for 40 days. And the representatives of this country and the representatives of this country would talk back and forth. And at the end of 40 days, if there was no resolve at all, if there was no agreement on how we could settle this thing, then they would bring about a negotiation, which there was a day of peace that was called. This was on the 41st day. Now, if there was an agreement in that 40 days, that's great. But if there was not, then the day of peace was called. There would be a tent or something that was set up, some type of facility to span the border. Part of it would be in this in Israel's case, it was because the border between Syria and Israel was the River Jordan. It was usually a barge out in the middle of the river. But when there wasn't on water, then it was a tent that was spread over the border. Part of it would be on this side, part would be on this side. Now, when this happened, it was not the representatives of the kings who talked to one another. It was the kings themselves. Now, when they met together on this day of peace, there was no fighting on that day, then they were determined what to do. This king would start. The king that wanted to invade. Okay? And he would make a declaration of war by taking arrows in his hands. And these arrows, one arrow represented himself, one arrow represented his successor or his oldest son, another arrow would represent his people, and a fourth arrow would represent his God or his religious establishment that showed that his gods were on back of his decision. He'd strike the ground 3 times, which says that there is not a negotiation that has been made, and we must, I am going to invade you. 3 times he hits it. Now, the king that's being invaded, he has a choice. He can either take, then he also takes the arrows. And he takes the same amount of arrows. And he can strike the ground 3 times. Now, when he strikes the ground 3 times, it means this, according to the Peace of Karnak. I will give you 3 cities. Of my choice, I'll give you 3 cities. And the people of those cities, they will defend those cities themselves, but we as an army will not defend them. I'll give them to you. And whatever you have to do to take these cities, they're yours. And so, if he strikes the ground 3 times, it says, according to the Peace of Karnak, these 3 cities are yours, you can have them. Now, if this king over here then says he agrees with that, then he strikes the ground 3 times. He says, okay, I agree. I will take the 3 cities that you give me. So now things are resolved. The war is off. Things are great. And within the next 30 days, he'll claim his 3 cities. But if this king over here strikes the ground 4 times, 1, 2, 3, 4, it says, I will take your 3 cities, but I'll also lay siege to a 4th city. Because I'm not satisfied with the 3 that you're going to give me, but I'm going to take by force another one. Now this king now has a chance to respond. He can strike the ground 3 times, which says, I will give you the 3 cities, and if you want to take a 4th city, I will not prevent you from doing that. Or he can strike it 4 times, and he says, I'll give you the 3, but I will defend a 4th. Now, if this king strikes the ground 5 times, then he says, I will take the 3 cities that you give me, but I will also lay siege to 10 more cities. Now, if this king over here, then he has a chance to respond. If he responds with just 3 strikes, he says, I will give you the 3 cities, and I will not defend whatever you want with the 10 that you're going to take. But if he strikes the ground 5 times, then he says, you can have my 3 that I've given you through the Peace of Karnak, but I will defend the other 10. But if this king who's doing the invading strikes the ground 6 times, it says this, I will take your 3 cities that you give me, but I will use everything in my power to destroy your country. I'll take all the cities, I will attack and lay siege to everything, and it will be mine. Now, if this king then strikes the ground 3 times, he says, you can have my 3, and I will not defend. I'll do whatever is necessary. I'll give you tribute. I'll pay you with slaves. I'll let my people go into captivity, whatever you want. But if he strikes the ground 6 times, he says, I will defend to the last man my country. Now, what Elisha told Joash to do is to take his arrows and to hit the ground. And he says, and Joash knew exactly why he was hitting the ground. This was Israel's deliverance against Syria. He knew it. And so, when he only hit the ground 3 times, Elisha went nuts. Why did you do that? If you would have hit the ground 6 times, then God would have given you total and complete victory over Syria from this time forward. But what you did is that you hit the ground 3 times, meaning that you're going to be satisfied with the 3 cities that Syria says you will have. And from a historical point of view, from that time forward, Israel has never defeated Syria in battle. Never. The British have defeated the Syrians. The Crusaders have defeated the Syrians. The Ottomans have defeated the Syrians. The Arabs have defeated the Syrians. The Muljeks have defeated the Syrians. Everyone's defeated the Syrians except Israel. And in today's headlines in the papers, Syria says they will support the enemies of Israel. Hezbollah is supported by Syria. Yes. God gave Syria into Joash's hands that day. And if he would have just struck the ground 6 times, then Syria would have never again been a thorn in the side of Israel. And because of that decision that he made that day, then for 2,376 years, Syria has not been defeated by Israel. Even to this day. He was satisfied with taking the very minimum that his enemy was willing to give him. We don't know why he did it. Perhaps Joash was thinking, I'll have another chance. You know, Elisha's not going to die. His mentor, Elisha, didn't. Elijah went up in a fiery chariot. And I'm sure that Elisha the same thing will happen to him. And so I'll have another day. I'll have another time. I'll have another chance. He will give me this chance again. Because the enemy of God's people, Syria, God certainly is not going to let this go by without giving another chance. And there'll be a more opportune time for me to do it. Maybe Joash felt like, I'm too emotionally involved with this right now to make this type of decision. I'm worried about Elisha, and so I can't handle this right now. You know, God doesn't care about our emotions. He cares about His plan. Okay? And so maybe Joash said, maybe there's a more opportune time. God knows that I'm upset about Elisha. And so there'll be another time. Unfortunately for Joash, there was not another time. Elisha died less than a year after this. Joash died 2 years after this. And never again did God give him that opportunity. He did give his 3 cities. God gave him the 3 cities. The peace of Karnak guaranteed him the 3 cities. He gave the 3 cities. It was done. But he had the opportunity, and God gave him the opportunity to defeat Syria from that time forward. Never again to be bothered with that country again. If Joash would have just hit the ground 3 more times. Okay? What would that take? 2 seconds. 2 seconds affected the next 2,000 plus years. And 2 seconds affected the lives of millions who have been killed as a result of it and have been oppressed as a result of it. What are 2 seconds in our lives? What does that mean for us? The person that you talk to today, the person you visit today, the person that you come in contact with today is not come in contact with you by accident.
That's right.
What are we going to do with it? And so the opportunity is there to make a difference. And you know, Joash had no idea that his decision was going to affect the course of history. He had no idea. And you have no idea the effects that your decisions will make. Okay? But the decisions that you make with the opportunities that God gives you will affect somebody for all of eternity. That's a guarantee. In the case of Joash, he never, ever again received the opportunity that God gave him at that day or that hour. And not only did he, but his people and his nation reap the consequences of that decision for the last 2,000 plus years. One man. And you know, you are in a greater position than Joash. Joash is only a king of a people. You're a child of the king. You are in a greater position than Joash. So your decisions that you make have even greater repercussions, perhaps, than what Joash did. Today, when we evaluate our lives, what do we come up with? What am I going to do with the opportunities that come in my life today? What am I going to do with those things that come across my path today? Am I going to be satisfied with the very minimum? Or am I going to be dissatisfied with the minimum to the point that I'll say, no, Satan, I'm going to give it everything that I have. Everything. Can we truthfully tell the Lord, Father, I took the arrows that you gave me and I slapped the ground as many times as I could? Or do we stand before Him and say, Father, I'm sorry. I can only bring myself to hit the ground 3 times. To take what was given to me and be satisfied with it. No, let's go beyond that. Let's go beyond that. Because we are children of the King, and those decisions we make will affect the kingdom of God and will affect history. It will. It will affect.
And that concludes today's teaching with Dr. Ron Charles of the Cupid Foundation. If you've been blessed by today's message, you can order more life-changing teachings in the form of DVDs, ebooks, hard copy books, and CDs by going online to www.cubitfoundation.org. That's www.cubitfoundation.org. Or you can call 770-207-0051. That's 770-207-0051. If you would like to become a supporting pillar of the Cupid Foundation, you can mail your tax-deductible contribution to P.O. Box 1316, Monroe, Georgia 30655. That's P.O. Box 1316, Monroe, Georgia 30655. Thank you for listening to Dr. Ron Charles of the Cupid Foundation, and may God bless you.